Good morning. I think we can start. And welcome to Siena. Welcome to the University of Siena. Welcome to the Certosa of Pontignano, one of the iconic places for our university. This is, as you can see, an old monastery which has been transformed in a conference location, and is quite fascinating to hold scientific meetings here, surrounded by frescoes, gardens, and the history of this place, which is in a way the history of Siena, the history of Tuscany, the history of Italy. The University of Siena is proud of hosting this third Vision conference, and I would like first of all to thank Francesco Grillo for the great collaboration in organizing this conference, for his original idea to hold this conference here in this Certosa. Actually, this is a place which is connected with Europe since a long time. Some of you probably know that every year in September or October, we hold here the so-called Pontignano Conference, a bilateral conference, Italian-UK, in which great themes of European, international politics and economics are discussed for a few days. And actually, the university certainly has an imprint of European flavor. We are one of the university in Italy who, from the very beginning, joined the Erasmus program. Probably, I believe, one of the most successful initiatives of the European Union, certainly in the field of education. The University of Siena also every year hosts several hundred students who come from all parts of Europe to study in our programs, and at the same time, many of our students have the opportunity of continuing their education in other European universities. So there is a link between the University of Siena and this place with Europe, which will only be made stronger by this conference, and hopefully this will be the first of many other conferences in the following years. I mentioned the students because I have the real pleasure of mentioning that many of our students are going to take part into the conference today, and it has been a great opportunity for us and for them to be able to attend this conference. When I think about our students, I think about the programs that are specifically dedicated to international and political and European studies, the program in international studies, in European studies, and the program in public and cultural diplomacy. I am particularly happy that our students are here participating to this conference. 30 years ago, a famous Italian singer, Gianna Nannini, who is incidentally born in Siena, she wrote a famous song called European Boy, Ragazzo dell'Europa. And she was talking about those boys and girls at that time who got to know Europe better. This song makes me think that when I was a university student. And so for all the people from my generation, we saw the European Common Market, the CEE. So we saw Europe growing as a political and economic union. And we remember when Europe did not exist. We remember when we need to change money, traveling from one country to the other. Those from my generation still ask themselves, do I have to change my money to go to Finland? Or do I have to change my money to go to Sweden? Actually, if I'm not wrong, the answer is different for the two countries. But those guys there, our students, were born with not only the idea of a European Union, but with a European Union was a fact for them. Now they have the responsibility. We had the responsibility of starting the idea of a European Union, starting from the Ventotene document written by an alumnus of the University of Siena. And they have the responsibility of making the idea of their predecessor a fact. And they have the responsibility of making Europe becoming a union on social grounds. And I think this is the kind of idea, this is the kind of topic that will be discussed in these days here in Pontignano. So I really am proud of the role of the University of Siena in this process. And I'm again grateful to Francesco Grillo for the extraordinary collaboration, and I'm grateful to all of you who have chosen to come to Siena and attend this conference, which I am sure will be a success. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Francesco. I'm also very proud to be your friend. I am also Francesco. We have an inflation of Francescos here. We also have some Francesca, by the way, you know. And talking about Francesco, this is welcome to a monastery. This was supposed to be a monastery. And as you may know, one of the three main functions, social function of monks and monasteries were about reproducing knowledge. No, they had a monopoly in copying books. So they were the internet of the Middle Age before somebody called Gutenberg introduced the printing machine in Europe. So we are in a monastery which is the ideal setting for trying to do the kind of exercise that we are proposing to you, which the British people, we have quite a number of British people here, notwithstanding that you are outside the EU, call problem solving. No, so this is the idea is to very much to overcome a number of gridlocks that stop Europe to make some updating of its institution to 21st centuries with ideas. And I need to thank very many people. I need to thank Intesa San Paolo, and we will also have the participation of Enel Foundation, especially to your working group, Simone, on the new Green Deal. Sky TG24. I think this corporation media, they all have in common that, at least in Italy, they are known to be to have some inclination for for renovation, let's say. And well, we will need to very much talk about Martens Center, Foundation for European Progressive Studies, European Liberal Forum, but also New Direction, and also the Green Alliance Foundation. I think one of the main, I probably would say the main distinctiveness of this conference is that we have an infrastructure such that we are working with all the 5 political foundations which act as quote unquote think tanks for the 5 big political groups. So we, in a sense, we have quite a number of ingredients to make the EU's Man on the Moon movement, as Ursula von der Leyen called the Green Deal before everything collapsed with the pandemic. It was at the end of 2019, I think, to work. So let's see a little bit the distinctiveness of well, basically, I think that the main, the 3 things that make this conference different from thousands of gathering on Europe is number one, the problem setting and the objectives. You know, I think that we sort of gathered here people who are both visionaries, no, is our name, and pragmatic. You know, who are very keen on finding solution, no, and not just to the blah 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 somebody was talking about. This is because somebody somebody called Immanuel Kant, not to be confounded with Emmanuel Macron. He mentioned the moral imperative, you know. Well, and by the way, you know, the great German philosopher reminds me of the discussion that we were having yesterday with our German friends Paul and Matthias, you know. And well, change is a moral imperative. I think that vis-a-vis, we think, by the way, I need to thank also the vision team here. We very much are convinced that vis-a-vis the dramatic acceleration of history, we had the pandemic, we now having the war, we will have a famine. It's like the plagues. Well, vis-a-vis this dramatic acceleration, we need to change. Otherwise, we sort of disintegrate, you know. Change is a very basic precondition to survive. And it is much more true now. So this is a problem setting by which we believe that things that were absolutely impossible, unconceivable, like as Romano knows the common defense and foreign policy, now becomes possible, and even transnational lists, you know, as with Sandro will. So this is the idea, no? The ingredients. We already mentioned you know, as the people that the vision algorithm, together with the algorithm of the University of Siena, chose to be here today, and the method for problem solving. We have a concept paper, which is very important. I know that everybody has read carefully the concept paper. The concept paper which frames all the plenaries and working groups. We have a process through which we will produce something that we call the manifesto. Last year we may call it in a different way this way, because manifesto reminds some other revolutionary time. If we can go ahead very briefly because we managed to be late already, or almost. So basically, these are the 4 working groups that we are having in the afternoon. Finding a role for Europe within the battle for global digital leadership. I mean, this is again our very personal conviction, my personal conviction. Technology is the driving force, which is changing everything. And here, Europe very much needs to find a way to re-enter a battle which until probably 1 year ago, now it's a little bit different from Taormina, was just between China, USA and China. And there are all sorts of numbers that say that very thing. The working group 2 is the dramatic comeback of an old aspiration. So the defense and the foreign policy, the common defense and foreign policy. The first one, by the way, working group has been reframed by Francesco, another Francesco, European Liberal Forum. The second very much is responsibility of Peter. I cannot see Peter here. Peter is over there. The Martens Center for European Studies. Working Group 3 is about EU as the place to experiment the innovation that can save liberal democracy from technological obsolescence. And Jamie McKay will frame this thing later. Here the idea is not just any longer about the democratic deficit, the very old and hopeless debate on democratic deficit. It's a little bit more, you know. There is a question of democracy. The working group number 4 is Simone working group is finding the right path towards neutrality, a new Green Deal in the age of energy insecurity, instability. Something which is also important to say is that we reframed many times the concept paper because of Ukraine. No, so they work together with Bill. We reframed very much to adapt to the. Very last slide on the 7th plenary session. We now start with a session with our inspiration, Romano, Prodi, and a few other people. Anna will also be there on what went wrong and what went, which was the success so far of Europe. So it's a little bit of the problem setting of the entire. The second plenary session will be hopefully a discussion of the concept paper. And here the idea is how to adapt institution to the 21st century. Tomorrow we will have 3 plenary sessions on European media, which is an important part to have a component, to have a European-wide sort of public opinion. Africa, rethinking Africa. Erasmus for all. Here there is a proposal, a vision proposal on making Erasmus compulsory, not just free for everybody. Because again, we think that nation states were established on a number of levers, including compulsory education up to a certain age. And this may apply to Erasmus and also to the European civil service. USA and China is there a right distance. With Jan Piotrowski from The Economist, we will add, this is also a last minute twist, we will add India, because it's not just USA and China. Europe needs to also consider that other giant. And last plenary session will be with FEPS and with David Rinaldi on the next generation of EU public finance. And so it is a reflection on how could the next generation EU and this idea to turn the stupid pact into something a little bit smarter, the Stability and Growth Pact, if we had to redraft the entire thing today. considering what happened in the last 2 years and especially in the last 6 months. So this is it, and without further talking, I would wish to the very first plenary session with Bill Emmott as chair. He replaced Victor Mallet, whose flight was hit by a bird, and Romano Prodi and Anna, Antonio Parenti. Marta is online, and Antonius, I think. Bill, thank you very much.
So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my privilege to be taken off the substitutes bench to chair this session. Thanks to Victor Mallet's problems with his flight. He will be here later, I believe. But that anyway gives me a chance to say that here is an Englishman sitting in Siena, chairing a discussion on the future of Europe and Europe at a crossroads. I make 2 additional comments on that. One, this is an Englishman who lives in Ireland, and therefore I consider myself a Brexile, an exile from Brexit, and I will get Irish citizenship in 1 year's time, God willing. But second, the United Kingdom is part of the future of Europe, whatever the daily moves of the politics of my native country. So it is, in a way, central to, not central, but part of everything that we will discuss during this conference. Europe at a crossroad of its history. Well, I can say that some years ago there was an episode of The Simpsons in which the Simpson parents were on an airplane and were filmed reading The Economist, publication with which I was associated. And the cover says, Indonesia at a crossroads. And one says to the other, hey, Marge, did you know that Indonesia is at a crossroads? So Europe is always at a crossroads in many ways. But there's no doubt that there's been an extraordinary set of unpredicted, or at least unpredictable, events that have put new challenges on Europe. We had only just recovered from the euro sovereign debt crisis when we suddenly found in Europe our major security and trading partner, the United States, opening both a rhetorical battle with Europe about NATO and NATO spending, and an actual fight on trade with tariffs on steel and aluminium, and attacking the very multilateral institutions that are fundamental to the European idea. So the Trump administration was a first shock. The second shock, of course, was the pandemic, challenging public health, challenging collaboration, challenging national policy as well as European policy. And now we have the invasion, unprovoked, unjustified, brutal invasion of Ukraine by the world's largest nuclear superpower, bringing death and destruction to the borders of the European Union, but very much into Ukraine, and making explicit pretty explicit threats of the potential use of nuclear weapons. So we cannot think that we are in a normal time. I'm going to ask our panelists to make some opening remarks, starting with Romano Prodi on my left. We have Marta Dassù joining on video. She's not. Okay, if she joins, she will be second. And then Anna on Ukraine, of course, and we have Antonio Parenti and Antonios Nestoras also. So the purpose of this plenary is to set a kind of intellectual framework for our discussions. Where the hell are we? What on earth is the situation within and around the European Union? And I know no one better to answer those questions than Romano Prodi.
How many minutes I have?
Well, if I tell you 10 minutes.
12.
12.
12.
Exactly. Europe is built in negotiations like this.
Look, it's the first time. Thank you for the invitation. Look, I'm very happy to be here, even if I start with a disagreement with my friend Bill, because Europe is not at a crossroad, but is close to a car accident. Much more than a crossroad. Let's say, I mean that Europe is not close to a crossroad, but to a road accident. That is a little different from, I mean that if we don't change urgently, really is a disaster, because this war has made any let's say, any previous long-range planning absolutely worthless. Look, Europe made, I have to be brief because 12 minutes are very few. Europe has made fantastic progress in the last 2 years because of COVID, because of Brexit, and because of the self-consciousness of the German businessmen which understood that without big Europe, even big Germany is not big. You know, this is the real terms. Now we are in really in the situation of absolutely alarm concerning foreign policy and security. We are clearly in front of a situation in which Europe is inexistent. We have been united by NATO, and we must stick on NATO. NATO is how we belong, and we must belong to NATO. But it was clear that we had no word on NATO, and Europe was absolutely inexistent in the policy, simply was a faithful follower of American decision, thanks God, I say. But when we went to sanctions or to the energy policy, clearly we started to be divided, you know, and it's not an absurdity that now there are quite a few European countries that are blessing the Hungarian veto and trying to say, because there is no agreement. And we cannot go on in this situation. Absolutely. Cosa c'è? Non capisco. Più vicino, devo mangiare. Well, I mean, that's fine. We are simply inexistent in the field of foreign policy. as far as we are faithful to NATO, thanks God, we give a contribution, but it's always passive. And we cannot go on in such a situation. Europe potentially is a great entity, second in the world in industrial production, first in export, fantastic economy, and absolutely no role. The example typically for us Italian is Libya. Sardinia is closer to Libya than to continental Italy, and in Libya the power is shared by Russia and Turkey, that are 80% of Italian GDP and 80% of Spanish GDP. This is absolutely something that cannot go on. Can we make progress in foreign policy? Yes, but we need to change absolutely our direction. It's not anymore possible to try to have a unanimity decision in foreign policy. My federalist friends, they are pushing for that, for the revision. Look, to end up unanimity, we need unanimity. That's all. That's all. So we have only one way out, like the euro, and reinforced cooperation. And now the ball is not in the hand of Germany, but in the hands of France. There is only one way out. France understands history and does not drive the French car looking at the back mirror, but the front mirror, and put a complete disposition of Europe, the veto right, and the nuclear armament. No other way out to prepare a common foreign policy and a common army. Why? Why? Simply, look, history is going on, and we have under considered the German rearmament. The German rearmament is is an incredible change. You know, not because I have any doubt of German democracy. I should like that Italy could have a democracy like Germany. But when you put 100 billion on the table and more than 2% of GDP of an incredible, wealthy and powerful country, you change all your history. You create a machinery between government, industry, bureaucracy, army, and so on, that change history. And then you cannot do the same thing later. So the problem is either you do it now or you will never do it, because the balance of history will change. And the way to do that is now we are in a moment in which I think that concerning foreign policy, France, Italy, Germany, and Spain are in the same mood. They must stick together on France initiative, French initiative, of course, and one day later, 10 new countries will convene in this reinforced cooperation. I know you can think that this is the dream, but it's the only possible way out. The alternative is to be absolutely out of history. And we are considering it now, you know, and then all other problems comes later. Of course, you will have a Europe, you know, but repeat, the great change, Euro was done with instrument, and now it's even more to change with this. Then clearly you have to have a consistent policy for future enlargement, for neighbor countries, and in my opinion, even for enlargement, there is a clear direction. As always, I always insisted the former Yugoslavian countries must come immediately, very soon, start negotiation with the European Union. We cannot wait that Serbia is changing the internal policy, and Albania, of course, and then the Ukrainian problem. Setting the European rules must be long range negotiation because of the rules that are ruling the enlargement, and but clearly how the peace process will go on will be regulated in the future. This case still is positive that we opened this possibility, but I don't think that the solution can be urgent. And then when we have done that, we must think to, as Macron hinted, to some sort of long range agreement with the neighbor states. I go back to my old proposal that I did in the Commission in 2002 and was absolutely blocked, vetoed by Sweden and UK, to have close around Europe the Ring of France. Let's say all the countries from Belarus to Morocco, let's say from Syria, Israel, and so on, they have one by one the right to negotiate some agreement with Europe that will be absolutely flexible, long in time, and so on, and so on, and so on. You know, this is my clear idea about Europe, but what I think is that is urgent. I think also that is in the French interests. The African problems of France are increasing and being very serious. And I am always thinking to the concrete danger that in Africa you have the Chinese economic links with the Russian, protected with the Russian military influence, and we have some sort of duopoly on Africa. And even that, we must have a European policy, and it's not enough to have a French policy. You know, I was UN delegate in Mali, and thinking to the to the Russian, let's say, domination of Mali, for me, absolutely incredible, and is an anti-colonial, anti-French, anti position. And so we have also to move the policy. You know, I am afraid to have exhausted my time, you know, and there are at least 100 more things to say, but I wanted just to sum up my idea on the future of Europe. Otherwise, I think that Europe will not have any future.
Fantastic. We will absolutely come back to you for the other 100 things. But thank you for both describing the car crash, the sense of a point in history, and providing, well, I think there can be no better voice on the sat-nav, on the satellite navigator, than Romano Prodi's. So thank you for giving us some route guidance for the future of foreign policy. I'm going to welcome our friend Marta Dassù on the video, who is also a great guide for the future of Europe, ASPENIA Italy director, former Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs. I'm told, Marta, that you will give us some reflections at the end of our discussion.
If it is possible, yes.
If that's your preference, then we will absolutely adopt that. But if I I can't look back at the screen, but otherwise I.
Yeah.
And I'm going to invite Anna Nalyvayko, project officer at Martens Center, a Ukrainian who grew up in Italy, to speak.
Thank you, Bill, very much. Thank you, everyone, for the invitation. Thank you, Francesco. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here at the same table with President Prodi and with colleagues from other political foundations. But I guess for and foremost, I'm here as a Ukrainian. I have been born in Ukraine. I have been raised in Italy, as Bill said. But of course, I'm here to speak from a Ukrainian point of view and what went wrong according to Ukrainians. You know, when I moved to Italy in 2000, Ukraine was a really much unknown country. I still remember being the only foreigner, the only Ukrainian for sure in my school, and there was a lot of unknown about Ukraine. It was known to have belonged to the Soviet Union. It was somewhere in the neighborhood of Russia, but from the general population, it was still a relatively unknown country. And you know, while we're sitting here today, already in 2014 that has changed, and today even more. Today, very, very small towns are known all around the world. We know all the names of the suburbs of Kiev, and this is something that is tragic, but I think it's a tremendous momentum for Ukraine to gain support on the international arena and to try and move forward and move away from Russian sphere, from Russian influence, and embrace its Western aspirations. But one of the questions of the working group was what went wrong. So, you know, in Europe, we cite that the war started on the 24th of February, 2022. But if you speak to a Ukrainian, that will tell you that they have been at war for 8 years already. So for Ukraine, what happened is that in 2014, the war started with Russia. So what should have been a game changer, a real game changer after the legal annexation of Crimea in 2014 was not. So yes, there were reactions from the Western community, from the international community. The referendum was not recognized, but some mild sanctions were applied, but in the end, nothing really changed. Putin was not isolated. Russia was not seen as a hostile country to work with. So we kind of moved on. Crimea was quite fastly forgotten or put aside, because then the conflict in Donbass started. So when the conflict in Donbass started, when Russia was supported, the Kremlin was supporting the separatists, we moved our attention span to Donbass, and Crimea was kind of left aside as an unresolved question. But okay, let's not focus on Donbass because the fighting was there. The conflict in Donbass was labeled as a frozen conflict for many, many years, and it's still labeled as a frozen conflict. But if you really talk to Ukrainians on the contact line and to Ukrainian officials, they will tell you that it was not frozen, because there were many violations of ceasefire and much fighting going on. 1.4 million of internally displaced people from those territories. So I think, you know, this is what is really important to understand, that Ukraine has been at war during this whole time since 2014, and the fighting, it was not extended. It was really just in one part of Ukraine, but it was still going on. And in the meantime, the country had to reform. So 2014, why 2014 is so important? You have to understand that 2014 was, first of all, the revolution of Maidan started as a peaceful student protest. So all the, you know, disinformation and the propaganda around it, that it was a stage coup by the US or by some Western forces or by NATO, is in a way very insulting to those people who really took the stand in Maidan and who were standing for months, really freezing months, because it was winter time, and winters in Kiev are really harsh. We're staying for months there trying to make a point. But why is 2014 so significant? Because this is the time where the post-Soviet generation was in their 20s. So, you know, people who were born right before the dissolution of the Soviet Union or right after, I'm, you know, a product of, I was born in the 90s, so right on the verge of the collapse. Those were people who, the first generation who had the possibility of going abroad and studying. We talked about Erasmus, even though Ukraine is not, of course, in the EU, there was still a lot of partnerships with Western universities. So these this was the first generation who could leave Ukraine freely and study, have an experience abroad, and they went to Western University, they went to Canada, to the US, to Europe, and they saw what life looked like there, they saw what education looked like there, and they went back to Ukraine, and they wanted that for their country. So of course, in 2014, when there was Yanukovych was about to sign the agreement with, either the association agreement with the EU, but he moved on towards Russia. This is where they really felt that they were moving far away from that. And this is when this whole thing started. So students taking the streets to protest and wanting to the government to listen to their demands to move towards the EU. So fast forward, we all know what happened. Yanukovych was fled to Russia, and there was a democratically elected government. So democracy at that time really, really worked. It was, 40 million of Ukrainians who spoke and who decided who their president was going to be. So once again, when even today Ukrainians hear about, this Cold War rhetoric that Ukraine belongs in the sphere of influence of Russia, or that it's NATO who's deciding, who's kind of, being the master puppet behind it, it's really not right and hurtful to Ukrainians to hear that, when they really, really fought for democracy starting from 2014 and all these years. So the EU today, we talk about the newly found unity, and yes, indeed, there have been many packages of sanctions, but now unity is starting to wobble. Of course, President Prodi mentioned the support, some of the countries, the support for Viktor Orban's veto on the oil and gas embargo. But of course, all these policies since 2014 to now, we are really paying them, because we are not just talking about, of course, gas was going to be used as a blackmail tool by Russia. Now the same they're doing with all the grain imports. So the Ukrainian ports are being blocked. There's lack of export of wheat from Ukraine. Many countries risk, and Russian government clearly said that they're going to release that if the West lifts sanctions. So once again, we are going into this blackmail sort of toolbox that Russia is using. But mainly what happened is that in 2014, not enough was done, and now there is an opportunity to do something, because since 2014, what happened is that in reality, Russian interest, really Russian influence, really came to the EU, and they came under the form of financial investments from oligarchs, the golden passport schemes that were granted under financing different organizations, NGOs, political parties. So this is really, trying to kind of spin the Russian image in a positive way to try to lift the sanctions. So I think this is a lesson that we have to learn, and this is something that has to be to stay with us. And on enlargement, Ukraine is really much aware that enlargement is a very lengthy process. It's not going to happen overnight, that there are a lot of reforms to be done. But bear in mind that since 2014, Ukraine reformed quite a lot. And even if you ask any of the EU countries how long a reform process takes, it takes a very, very long time. And Ukraine, back in 2014, when Yanukovych fled, the state treasurer was left with $10,000 in the state. This was all the money that was available to run the state, and Ukraine managed to reform quickly and not to declare default. Then there was a lot of other reforms that took place very swiftly for a country that has not had any reform since its independence. So way more reforms have been done since 2014 than since the independence of the country. And Ukrainians are very well aware of that. And what is the driving force of Ukraine is that since 2014, there is a very, very strong civil society in Ukraine that is really trying to keep the government accountable, is really trying to push for reforms. There was a very big gesture done by the president of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola. She granted a space in front of the European Parliament in Brussels to the Ukrainian civil society to kind of move things forward and to be the spokespeople for the nation. But I just leave you with that. It's important to understand that, yes, of course, at some point peace has to come, but it cannot come at any cost, because if Russia stops fighting today, there will be no more war. But if Ukraine stops fighting, there might be no Ukraine. So this is a very important point to understand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. That final point is a very, very telling one. This is a battle for survival for Ukraine, but one that has profound implications for the European Union and that we need to grapple and find unified responses to. Let me ask Antonios to be next, and perhaps since you are not on the latest list in everyone's, you are also from the substitutes bench like me. Maybe you could give a brief introduction of yourself as well.
Very brief, very brief. I'm very happy to be coming on as a substitute. First of all, in this panel, thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Dr. Antonios Nestoras. I'm the head of policy and research for the European Liberal Forum, the political foundation of the European Liberal family. It's very difficult to come in a panel after Romano Prodi, so I will try and answer a different question. How did we come here? How did we come to the crossroads? The answer for me is also a major theme of this conference, and that's technological development, a major source of change in history, probably the biggest source of change in history. And it's very easy to see that we live in a completely different world than 15 or 20 or 30 years ago, let alone 70 years ago, when the post-war order, how did you, Francesco, write, the great post-war European dream was established or consolidated here in Rome in 56, in Maastricht, in Amsterdam, and in Lisbon. We live in a different world. We don't have to go that back far in the past. We can look at the last institutional reform in the EU, which is the Lisbon Treaty, 2007. Did you sign for Italy, Professor? Yeah, 2007, the last Lisbon Treaty. If you look at the world back then and you take a screenshot of the world back then, you can see the difference. There were no smartphones, there were no self-driving cars, there was no artificial intelligence application, working artificial intelligence applications in the world. Very few of them. Happy times. There were no killing drones. Happy times. There were no cryptocurrencies at all. There was no digital finance. Nothing. Well, of course, there was no migration crisis. There was no financial crisis. There was no debt crisis. There was no Greek crisis. There were no social networks, or very few. Again, there were no platform workers. China, Russia was not as aggressive as they are now. Turkey was always as aggressive, but at least back then we could call it a liberal, or not a liberal, a secular democracy at least. So a completely different world. You get my point. And the EU running on this operating system of the Lisbon Treaty is a critical error. We need reforms, we need treaty changes possibly, and that was the spirit or the mentality of the conference on the future of Europe. I don't know how this is going to work, but the fact is that the EU's operating system, if the treaty is an operating system, it needs a critical update. And I know very well that when the notification pops up in the laptop, the first thing that you do is to snooze. Remind me later, not now, I have to do this, not now, I have to do that. But there is always a point where this critical update cannot be postponed anymore, cannot be snoozed anymore, and you have to do it. Otherwise, there's going to be some critical 404 error. Perhaps we're not on the crossroads, perhaps we're not on the car accident or close to a car accident, but we are very close to a blue screen in the EU. And there are many things that we can say more about how we come here, but the Ukraine war is a turning point for the EU. It is a turning point for the EU. Bill, do I have 2 more minutes? Yes, yeah. I asked, but exactly, I asked this question exactly at the right time. So There is a very famous quote by the first Secretary General of NATO, Lord Ismay, who said that NATO and the wider European security order was created for three things: keep the Americans in, the Russians out, and the Germans down. That can be the fundamental security constants of Europe for the past 70 years. And you can see, especially with the war in Ukraine, that all three of them are upended. We know for decades, probably now, or more than a decade now, that the US is pivoting to Asia. It's not about Trump. It was not about Trump. That was a policy. There is an element of continuity in this US foreign policy. It started with Obama, it continued with Trump, it continues with Biden. There is some sort of detachment, not complete detachment, thankfully, but there is a tendency for the US to look elsewhere and not only in Europe, at least not as much as in the past. You have the Russians that want to get back in. So you have the Americans that want to go a little bit out. You have the Russians that want to get back in. And I mean, there's no greater indication of that than the war in Ukraine. And you have the Germans that they have their own, how do they call it, Zeitenwende, their own turning point with 2% of defense spending, 100 billion in defense procurement. So this is definitely a critical turning point for Europe. I don't know if it is going to be the EU's man on the moon moment. I believe that there were plenty of man on the moon moments in the EU history, but definitely we need a new spaceship to reach the moon. That's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, as long as you don't ask Elon Musk to provide that spaceship, I think that's the important thing. Thank you very much, Antonios. In a way, as the Englishman on the panel, I can reflect that one of the English devilish contributions to the EU was always to press for more enlargement, often against some resistance from France and others, to press for more enlargement, and then, of course, to be the country that then withdraws once it decides that the European Union is no longer fit for its purposes. But the logic of enlargement, I think, was always there. It wasn't really a British project. The necessity is always there. And we've heard that described here, but it makes the EU a very difficult place to run. So I'm therefore going to ask Antonio Parenti, head of the European Commission representation in Italy, to share with us his difficulties, if you like.
Thank you for providing me at least for 3 hours to answer your question. I'll try to be brief though. You know, I mean, like in many conferences, one comes in with a speech and always goes out with a different, totally different one. While I was listening, especially to Professor Romano Prodi, it came to me, to my mind, a trip that I did to Portugal many years ago. Well, it was a beautiful cooking book that says, the title was 360 Ways to Cook the Cod, which basically is one different way for cooking it every day. And the debate in Europe, to me, reminds dramatically that book. We all agree to the fact that we need to cook the cod, but we all have different recipes on how to cook it. And the problem is not only we have 365 different recipes on how to cook it, but the problem is that the heat, as the two previous speakers have noticed, is on. So we need to cook it very fast, to be very honest. So we have diversity in Europe, the 360 ways to cook it. We need unity in a certain manner. How we achieve this? I wish I have an answer, which clearly I don't. But what I think we should not forgetting why we try to find an answer is that we don't need only to bring a good recipe, but the recipe must be tasteful for the European population. Is extremely easy to consider what are the things to be done. We can have a difference, and it's not a small difference, between going into the pragmatic F word pronounced by President Draghi in Strasbourg, which was federalism, of course, or going for the reinforced cooperation, which Professor Prodi is indicating here, or the confederation that Enrico Letta, for example, has specified. The question is, how do we bring the population along with all of this? Because that can be use man on the moon, but I mean, if that man is alone, then it's a very difficult situation up in the moon. And I think what we need is to reinforce, regain the European citizens' confidence on the European project. Now more than ever, the last 2 years more than ever, should bring to the Europeans the need to cross that path, do that further move ahead in a form or another, but have a very serious discussion on what we need to do. The issue is that, let's face it, discussing about Europe remains a fairly, very often lonely moment. I mean, if we look at the results of the Future of Europe conference, the popular participation has not been tremendous. So the question remains out there, how we bring people back to Europe. I remain a formidable and staunch supporters of transnational political lists, because I think that will be one of the few moments where finally we can talk Europe at political level within the citizens. Is that going to be enough? I don't know. But we need to start also in a way to bring Europe closer to the citizen, understand it. And I think that one of the other ways to do it is not only focusing on the majority, but also focusing on some policies. And I can think here more than anything else at the social policy. It's very difficult to bring about some of the necessary and possibly difficult to forward in the future policies which will be necessary for coping with the challenges that we have without an adequate social policy. We started with the program SURE. We started with the Next Generation EU. We may have to go further. Difficult, certainly difficult if the problem is always an accounting problem, but extremely necessary if we have to break that silos that exist between national politics and European politics. For many times, for many years, everything which was wrong was the problem, the result of a discussion in Brussels. Everything that was good was a result of the policies in the capital. If we don't break that silos, I'm extremely afraid that whatever type of decision we take is going to be difficult to explain and to get the population along. I conclude with something which was recently referred to me by a colleague of mine who were discussing with this prime minister. I will not the prime minister, and I will not name the prime minister. Basically, was saying, well, Prime Minister, what is your vision for Europe? And he said, well, if I had a vision, I would see a doctor. Well, I think it's time to go and see a doctor if you don't have a vision, because without a vision, we will only have formulas, and formulas do not excite a lot of people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antonio, for calling for that vision, which implicitly also needs to be a shared vision, shared by the citizens as well and across the European Union. I'm now going to invite Marta Dassù to offer her thoughts.
Thank you, Bill.
Marta.
Thank you very much. I heard already many interesting points. I completely share the idea that the war in Ukraine is a real sea change is changing, first of all, in my view, the cultural and the political attitudes from Europe and the kind of approach we have been having to international relations and foreign policy. Romano Prodi is very right from this point of view. I think that the main point, in my view, is that for a long period after the end of the Cold War, the idea from Europe and from Germany in particular, but not only, the idea was that trade relations and interdependence, economic relations per se, would also solve security issues. So de facto, Europe, in a sense, didn't need a real security and foreign policy because per se, economy would have put together the continent and put together the former adversaries like Russia. This was the famous German mercantilismo, we call it. And from this point of view, the war in Ukraine is really a sea change. It is no longer possible to think that economy can be separated from geopolitics, or that the European Union does not need a real defense and a real foreign policy. So it's a major change, a cultural change, first of all. The implication, in my view, is that we need to increase our strategic autonomy, but strategic autonomy means that we have to reduce our vulnerabilities in front of dependencies. Over-dependence on energy from Russia is clearly a security issue. This has become very clear with the war in Ukraine. And clearly we need to build up both a defense union and an energy union. This is clear. And our entire approach to interdependencies must change. We have vulnerabilities unless we are able to build up our autonomy in crucial sectors. A second point I would like to make, to have a foreign policy, the kind of Romano Prodi was describing before, we need to define a common European interest in front of specific challenges. And here we made some steps forward with this famous strategic compass, even if I have to say, I find the strategic compass a poor document in a sense, not only because the strategic compass speaks about 5,000 troops, which is ridiculous. After all, at the Helsinki summit, we already alluded to the need for 60,000 troops as a rapid deployment force in Europe. But in any case, leaving aside the size of the troops, the strategic compass is not the ideal document. We need to understand whether we can define a common interest, for instance, vis-a-vis Russia. This has always been, in my view, a weak point of Europe foreign policy. Russia has always divided the European countries for geopolitical reasons, because the view from continental Europe has always been very different as compared to the view from Poland, from the Baltic states. So my guess, my question mark is, will it be possible or not to find a common position vis-a-vis the management of the Russian problem once the war in Ukraine is over? I'm not completely sure. I think this is a fundamental point to be discussed. A third point I would like to make is around the qualified majority voting in foreign policy. Romano Prodi has already alluded to that. I think that building upon constructive abstention, for instance, would be equally important, would be possibly, that would be the only way out. I was thinking, for instance, to this major problem related to sanctions on oil. I mean, part of the European countries have already decided to go for a unilateral embargo. So in theory, at least, we could say, okay, we are not able to reach a consensus on oil sanctions. We decide to go for unilateral moves. The reality is that behind Hungary, many other countries are hiding themselves for economic interests. So, I think that constructive abstention and the decision to go for unilateral steps could be in a sense a way out. Going very quickly, two last points. First of all, we need a division of labor between NATO and the EU in the defense issues. This is very clear to me. One possibility could be to keep and increase the role of NATO on the Eastern Front. This is already happening, and leaving, in a sense, quote unquote, the Southern Mediterranean crisis to European missions. I think that Italy must reflect about this kind of division of labor, because the NATO center of gravity is shifting for evident reasons to the Baltic and to the Eastern Front. We are left in a difficult position on the Southern Front, also because what has been said before is very right. The United States will in any case go back to the Indo-Pacific as the key center of their interests, and they are withdrawing more or less from the Mediterranean theater. So a division of labor, a geographical division of labor, I think it's a possibility. Follow-up point, in my view, really, the real question is not so much about increasing military spending. In a sense, we are already doing that, looking to a defense union. What we need to do is to spending better, much better. We must integrate our military spending. This 100 billion from Germany, how they will be spent in a national way or in a European way. We need a common procurement. This is key. In my view, the industrial and technological component of European defense is absolutely key. And finally, on enlargement, I share what Romano already said together with you. We cannot give to the Balkan countries and to Ukraine, by the way, the impression that this sort of external ring is a sort of alternative to enlargement. That would be a self-defeating move. We need a European space of cooperation in many different policies, but we need to leave the door open. The real point will be whether we are able to build within the European Union strengthen cooperation in specific fields. But I mean, we cannot leave out from the European space key countries that are in a waiting room since a very long time, like the Balkan ones. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Marta. That's a great agenda for particularly including for the working group that we'll be having on defense and security and foreign policy this afternoon. A lot of things we really need to think about. Now, we've got 20 minutes left. I'm going to open up to questions from the audience and input from the audience. First, though, I'm going to ask a very quick question myself to both Romano, Prodi, and Anna, because I think in this discussion, there's been a sort of implicit assumption that the war in Ukraine will be resolved in a way that's, in a way, means the after is what we have to think about. The fact is that we have immediate priorities. How should, my question to both of you, how should the European Union, how can it help Ukraine achieve a successful outcome in this war so that we can then discuss the after? Anna, can you answer that?
If only I could. Well, I think that Ukraine made it very clear, there cannot be compromise on the territories, on territorial integrity, but it has also to be realistic. I mean, Crimea has been seized in 2014. Donbass has been, a battlefield since 2014 as well. It is very painful for Ukraine to seize those territories and to agree to that. But I think, realistically speaking, maybe some concessions have to be made, but it's ultimately up to Ukraine to decide what concessions Ukraine is willing to make. So I think the best the EU can do and the EU leaders can do is not to push Ukraine to kind of settle or to give up territories or to, appease Putin somehow, because it will not work. Everybody thought that if Ukraine would give the People's Donetsk Republic and People's Luhansk Republic to Putin, he would be happy with it and he would not move forward. But this is not what happened, because he did recognize those territories as independent republics, and then he still moved in. His goals changing to seizing all of Donbass or creating a land corridor from Donbass to Crimea, or now even a land corridor to Transnistria. So there will always be a new goal for him, and he will try and seize more territories. But I really think that it is up to Ukraine to decide what they're willing to give up, or a compromise will have to be reached ultimately, because as what we said, the EU, I mean, everything is about compromise. But what the EU should not do is to kind of give that impression to Putin that they will try to push Ukraine to settle and to kind of tip Ukraine's hand into that decision.
Thank you. Romano, Prodi, I mean, the worst car crash would be defeat in Ukraine, in effect. So what should we be doing in the next 12 months as the European Union?
Look, I agree. Only the Ukrainians can decide on the future of Ukraine. Europe, in this moment, we are moving to the role of weakening Russia. And this is a very difficult role, because this is why I'm thinking that only US and China can set up the problem, because in this moment, any decision we take is, of course, damaging Europe. And is becoming more and more difficult. It was much easier to agree on the problem of defense, because it was active, looking at some sort of solidarity. Now, if you touch oil, some countries hit another, gas, some other hit another. And look, there is another problem, that if we don't find some sort of compensation, the split among European countries and between Europe and US will increase heavily, because we are close. You have the rate of growth is decreasing. The uneasiness of economy is clear, more and more clear every day. You have to take decisions at the European level, European Central Bank, that are hitting in a different way the different countries. Then you have more and more the popular idea that US don't suffer anything and enjoy because of gas price and so on. When you have these trends in the policy making, you have to act immediately, because otherwise the great achievement of a new political unity will dissolve, because you cannot have a situation in which the tile pottery companies pay gas 5 times in Italy than in Spain, then 5 times in Italy than in the US, then you increase day by day this difference, and the governments are unable to harmonize that. There is no idea of harmonizing it with political and economic. And so this is the increase of the differentiation among countries. You could understand that reading how is every day Kissinger statements are appreciated. And if you read the Kissinger statements, they are for, let's say, differentiated policy and not for, and so if the situation is going on for a long time, I foresee a real split inside Europe and even a bigger split with the United States. I hinted before, maybe I was exaggerating, but how the few European governments, they have been not unhappy, let's say, of the Hungarian attitude. Yes. That they don't make any statement about that, positive statement about that, but you see how they are praying day by day in order not to take decision. This is what I really think, looking at the history, and this is what we have to decide soon.
The immediate problem-solving agenda, maintaining that unity and providing that sense of compensation. So, contribution from the floor, right at the back. There's a microphone somewhere. Is there a microphone? Sorry.
And speak loud, slowly, and clearly.
The microphone is coming back.
Possibly with a low voice.
Thank you. I would like your opinion on 3 points that you mentioned. I'll start with Antonio Parenti, the need of a vision to convince citizens. Today, we need an energy union that would reduce the cost by 50%, according to many studies, if we had joint buying of energy from third countries, a single energy grid and gas and so on. I think this can be a powerful argument for the energy union and for the defense union as well. And a question for President Prodi. In the Penelope project, during the first convention, you solve the problem of we need unanimity to get rid of unanimity, because in your project there was a clause that to have a final clause in the new constitution that was getting rid of the unanimity requirement in the ratification. And this was done also in the United States, in the constitution, in the Swiss constitution in the 19th century, and in the Australian constitution. So all the time we had a movement from a confederation to a federation. This was always done in a reform that included a final clause on a ratification that was breaking the previous order. Why you don't think this is possible now, and that we rather need a group of countries led by France to do the defense? Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to take several questions, so I ask the panelists to make notes of the questions. Francesco, another Francesco.
So the question is short, but the answer is complex. One of the things that you said I totally agree with is that I think that we need a grand vision of the future. I think that the Battle of Ukraine is the most vibrant representation of the crisis of liberal democracies. I think that in the next 30, 40 years, the biggest confrontation will be about different models of economic growth. China has proved that economic growth comes in a different formula, which is not liberal, is not democratic. And I think that the liberal democracies have their own problems. We are in a crisis, social justice, economic inequality. So I think that having all these many brains in one room actually would really lead to try to find the next formula for liberal democracies. What is the kind of future that we want? Because it needs to be just, it needs to be inclusive, it needs to include China, it needs to include Russia, it needs to include South America, it needs to include Africa, because in the end, the long-term history of humanity is united. And I think the crisis is between two key formulas. So we need to dream big, and Ukraine is just symbolic of a crisis.
Thank you, Francesco. Kurt de Boeuf, and then Calypso. Okay, Calypso and then Kurt. No. Kurt, then Calypso.
Yes, hello. My name is Kurt de Boeuf. I will try to speak with a low voice. I mean, we are focusing right now on the threat of Russia in Ukraine, and I think that we are forgetting about the threat of Russia in Africa and how they are trying to fight Europe, to divide Europe, to create danger for Europe in Libya, in Sudan, in Mali, and other countries. I think a lot of these countries, I mean, the Wagner Group is active. And we also seen in the vote in the Human Rights Council to sanction Russia that actually 40 of the 58 African countries didn't vote on the European side. Non-Middle East country, except for Israel and Libya, voted on the Western side. And I think this is a big problem on the long term, but also a big problem on the short term, where we can see chaos and again pushed a new migration crisis from from Africa to Europe. So, I mean, things are bigger than Ukraine when it comes to Russia. And I think that we perhaps should also find some solutions on the short term for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Calypso.
Good that I'm speaking after you, because I completely agree with what you just said. You know, we're obsessed with the East-West dimension, normal, given what's going on. But the global South really matters in the next decade, and especially to the extent that the EU is all about championing multilateralism and all the rest of it. But my question was more about a concern that I have when we think we're trying to have a vision, as Antonio was saying, you need one, whatever your eyesight is. And somehow we always tend to fall too much in our institutionalist obsessions. And one great, and of course, that's what the EU does. The EU is an institution, in fact, a set of institutions, a beautifully experimental institution, nevertheless an institution. And within that, we are quite obsessed with the veto. It's like, I mean, if I speak to my kids or my students and they have an ideal, a vision for Europe, it's the first thing they're going to say, we've got to get rid of the veto, because there are men in dark suits sitting in Brussels and they can't agree. In fact, it's not true. The fact is that the veto enlargement, I mean, the veto is not the problem in Europe. So the point I want to make, but it's also a question, is, and in fact, it puts Romano and Marta a bit in tension today, because Romano, you spoke about just now, again, getting rid of the veto. But the reason why European countries very quickly now are indeed going to disagree is because we have deep structural cleavages in Europe, differences of interest, of deep underlying interest, whether it's because of our history, our geography, our sensitivity, because we're small or big, we are peripheral or not. For all these reasons, we know very well. That's what the EU is all about. It's the beauty of the EU. And I know, Bill, you agree with me. So if that's the case, veto or not veto, the point agreeing is about trying to converge, trying to build, to create solidarity, to think strategically together. There are many ways in which we can try to converge or agree to disagree. And this is where I come back to Marta's, because of course in the Lisbon Treaty, we have non-unanimity for implementing foreign policy. Let's not forget that. And yet even there we can't agree because of these differences in underlying interests. What are the proxies then for getting rid of the vetoes? Well, the proxies are certainly Marta's, constructive abstention. We should use it more. And it's kind of a way of civility in foreign policy. We have small groups, the willing and able. That's what we did with Iran. That's what we're doing in many areas. We should do it better. We should lend EU institutions and budget for that. And maybe we can have a conversation about veto, unanimity -1 or unanimity -2. But if we obsess with getting rid of the veto, we'll have countries, as we just heard, who will veto getting rid of the veto. And plus, I don't even think it's in the interest of the EU. Because if you override, what do you do with getting rid of the veto? You have big countries overriding small countries. You're going to have the Baltics one day being put in a minority, or you're going to have Greece being put in a minority, or Portugal being put in a minority. Is that what we want? Is that what the EU is all about? Because do you ever think we're going to put France and Germany in a minority? You know, I'm willing to bet my, something or other, not the life of my kids. But so this is an advocacy against our obsession with getting rid of the veto. Thank you.
Very good.
So
we'll be hearing more from Calypso in the next plenary session. We're going to have one more question here. Yep, there we go.
Calypso. Morning, my name is Stephen Everts. I work in Brussels at the European External Action Service. And it's nice that I speak after Calypso because I wanted to pick up this point of how to get the stronger foreign policy that President Prodi and many others, Marta, have pleaded for, and rightly so. This is the right aspiration that we have, given everything that's happening in the world and in Ukraine in particular. Just to pick up on Calypso's point as part of the discussion, what has happened in the last few years is that countries have always had national interest and they have diverged, and Antonio Parenti alluded to that. We have diversity and we need unity, and how do you transform one into the other? But what has happened in recent years, that it's become okay to sit on your position, retreat to the corner, and let the others come to you. And we have collectively made it okay for countries to be bought off, to be compensated again and again and again. And therefore, the price of having a veto has gone up for the group. And this is really what makes it so difficult in the field of foreign policy to come to the necessary timely decisions, big decisions that we need to take in a world of big threats and big giants and a war going on. So I think Calypso makes a very valid point. We shouldn't obsess with the veto, but at the same time, if you do still have the veto, you will never change that negotiating dynamic. And in other areas of the European Union, it's not that we have, dealing with lesser sensitive issues, we make big decisions by majority vote on which national interests are very pronounced. These are very sensitive issues too. And yet we have introduced a negotiating dynamic. You cannot just sit in your position and wait for the others to come to you. So I still think we need to talk about this in a way. And constructive abstention is a beautiful idea. We've many times from the EU institutional side proposed member states to avail themselves of the possibilities to use constructive abstention, but somehow they themselves don't seem so keen on that. So then the answer becomes indeed smaller groups or what have you to move forward. And this is also what we do. Sometimes we move in smaller. And I think I'd be in favor of doing that. Last point, indeed, on the global South and the global opinion on the war in Ukraine, I fear there's a bit of Eurocentrism in how we talk about the war. If you go around the world, they look at it very differently. They say, yes, a neighbor marching into a country like Russia has done is unacceptable. But, there are other cases where this has also happened. And in particular, the food security crisis that is staring us in the face will explode in the coming weeks and in coming months. And that means that the sort of support that we've had around the world so far for isolating Russia, for supporting Ukraine, for doing the things that we need to do to make sure that Ukraine wins the war. I think Ukraine has to win the war. We need more global consent and support for that. And that means taking care of other people's problems, other people's priorities. And you need to invest in that financially, you need to invest in that politically, otherwise it will not happen. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm going to give the last word to, yes, Zach, to Michele Geraci, just quickly, and then, all right, two more, and then I'm going to exercise there was a book by the British writer J.B. Priestley some years ago. One chapter was called Quietly Malevolent Chairmanship. And as a quietly malevolent chairman, I'm going to deny the panel the chance to respond publicly, but rather invite them to do so over coffee with everyone. And we will then break for coffee after these two contributions.
Mr. Geraci first?
No,
me first.
You have the microphone.
I have the power.
You have the power.
I'd like to put a question to Marta Dassù. She spoke about the necessity to have a common interest to face these, to have a more unity in the Europe. So I'd like to hear your reaction as far as Repower EU. We haven't spoken about that today. And so in a couple of days, the European Council is expected to approve or not the EU Commission proposal. It seems to me that it's a little bit shy because we always leave to the single member states to have to realize projects and so on, and the component regarding common projects, it's a little bit limited. Thank you.
Thank you, Michele.
Thank you very much, Michele Geraci, and I accept all the invitation for coffee later from all the panelists. I just want to bring some numbers into the equation that we have not discussed. And the lack of numbers may have created the illusion that we are doing the right thing. So I'm talking to Anna, who's from Ukraine, and I think what the European Union is doing is confusing the desire to hit Russia with the reality of how sanctions work. And this has created a political push to chase sanction. We're number 5, we do number 6. We try unanimity on a path that I tell you with my heart broken is helping Putin finance the war, not Ukrainian to win. Numbers. Export of gas for Russia, that was the mother of all sanctions, account for 2.2% of Russian GDP, 2.2. Oil, 3. So all the energy, crude oil and gas export to the EU accounts for 5% of Russian GDP. If we don't buy it and they don't sell it to someone else, which is not given, we kill our economies, and that's okay. We pay a price, which we're happy to do, but in exchange for nothing, because 2% will not have regime change or will not withdraw troops from Donetsk.
It is a very much larger proportion of the Russian budget. You have to think about how you buy weapons, you use the state budget.
That is a technical thing because we buy with the foreign currency and the budget is run in rubles so that they can print because they only have 18% debt to GDP, so they have a room to print money. But now, perspective, in Italy, fashion is export about 5% of GDP, tourism 15%. We got hit in the last 2 years with the zero tourism, more or less, 5%. We didn't have revolution in, people in the Montecitorio trying, no, we accept it. So the history of sanctions in Iran and Cuba also tell us a different story than what we would love to have. So my suggestion, practical of a coffee is we need to do the analysis. We need to do the impact analysis that the EU has not done. We have German economists who say 0.3, Ben Moll is wrong in some areas. He's too optimistic. Someone says 7%. Scholz says, I say 5, 6 for Italy. If we don't do the analysis, we don't know what we're doing. And more importantly, you're talking about the young people being in a way influenced. We influence in the wrong way the people of Europe that we think we're doing the right thing. So we need, as a European Union, communicate that these sanctions are working, but we need to know first, and then we tell the people, and then we will gain popular support. Because the thing that I'm afraid is next year when, if I allow one joke, 2 degrees lower temperature in the condition will not help the peace. Our liberal democracy will lose the popular support for continuing on a path. We are burning all the bullets, firing salvo without hitting the target. And at some point, people in Europe will say to our government, what have you done for the last 6 months? And that would be the worst outcome for Ukraine.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michela Geraci, and I thank very warmly our panel, the opening panel. It's laid a lot on the agenda. I thank Marta Dassù in Milan. I thank Antonios Nestoras, Anna Nalyvayko, Romano Prodi, and Antonio Parenti. I thank you all for your questions. I apologize for not giving the panel the chance to answer because it would take another hour and we have another session, but I encourage you to grab them over coffee. Thank you very much.